As people tune in, let me just remind our viewers that if you have a question during today's event, you can use the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will do my best to fold your questions into the conversation. I'm going to give it another 30 seconds or so people have a chance to join us, and then we'll get started. Good afternoon to our viewers in Europe, and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for this installment of our virtual series titled Superwahljahr 2024. With this series, we're looking at some of the important elections taking place around the world and at some overarching topics and themes. More than 60 countries, reflecting half the world's population, are headed to the polls this year, and perhaps the biggest single election is taking place in India. The elections there are massive in scale, involving hundreds of millions of voters spread across diverse geographical, cultural, and linguistic regions. And the country's vast population and diverse demographics make the elections in India a unique electoral challenge. So the election at this point is in full swing, and the incumbent Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, seems positioned to be re-elected, but his campaign is quite divisive. So to talk with us today about what's going on the ground in India, I am absolutely delighted to welcome the Süddeutsche Zeitung's Southeast correspondent, David Pfeiffer. He's in India covering the election. David, herzlich willkommen. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted to have you, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation and to your helping us understand a little bit about what's happening in India and what some of the things are that we should be watching. But I'd like to maybe start with a broad sort of question and maybe even a very basic question, which is, why does voting in India's general election last 6 weeks? For many of us, it's really not that common to have elections that last this long. We have an election day, there might be early elections, but we don't have an election period that lasts as long as this.
Yeah, I mean that's it. I had to figure it out as well, and I'm staying quite some time in India for the elections because of the long time that it takes. Basically, it's the election system was installed after the British left, and the system of the election is that every voter has the right to go to the election like approximately 2 kilometers or 1.5 miles away from his home. So if you live in the Thar Desert, or if you live on the Nicobar Islands, or wherever on the countryside, the voting machine will be actually carried to you. So there's a large movement. There's 986-ish million people are voters, registered voters, and 1 million people are traveling through the country with the election machines and collecting those votes and making sure that the voting is done correctly and that every voter gets a chance to vote. And so the organization, the organizational scale is so big, and the country is so big that it takes 6 phases, and that sums up to almost 7 weeks until every vote is collected.
Well, so that's a very helpful starting point just in terms of understanding the dynamic of what is going on in India. And I think a little bit later in our conversation, we might get into the role of technology and these electric voting machines that voters are using, and questions around whether or not this is a free and fair election. But before we do that, I'd like to look a little bit more closely at some of the parties and some of the candidates. Currently, the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is ruling with a coalition known as the National Democratic Alliance. And recent opinion polls have indicated that the BJP and the current Prime Minister Modi and their allies will remain in power. And the elections have been described by many analysts as being sort of the most predictable in decades. The main challenger to the BJP is the National Congress, but the National Congress lost in two previous elections, which were held in 2014 and 2019. And so I guess I'd love to hear from you about the major parties and individuals that we should be watching in this election, and what some of the key ideological differences there are between the parties.
Okay, so the BJP, the ruling party and his coalition partner, they are the surveys say that they will win by a landslide. Narendra Modi himself, who's hugely popular, even more popular than his party, has said he wants to win 400 seats of the Lok Sabha, which would give him enough power to even change constitutional laws and stuff like that. And the main problem for the opposition is that the Congress party, which you mentioned, with the most prominent figure would be Rahul Gandhi, is not in good condition. It was ruling the country after the independence from 47, but now is not in a good condition. But it's the only actual party that is, beside the BJP, that is campaigning in all over India. Other than that, there are certain smaller and bigger parties. I'm now in Kolkata at the moment, that's West Bengal, and the biggest party is the Trinamool Congress Party, which split from the Congress Party years ago. So, and the splitting of the voices of the election voices is one of the problems. The main ideological difference is the BJP has a Hinduism or Hindu national agenda called Hindutva, which is really not the only thing that they're doing. They are strongly concentrating on economics. They're ruling for quite some, they're ruling now since 2014. There's a feeling in the country that the country is economically gaining strength, getting stronger. It's now the 5th largest economy in the world. Not if you count it per people in the country, but in total, there have been, I think, like 100 airports have been built since the BJP is in power. So that is something that is important to the people here, like employment, economy, of course, like for every country. It's the economy is stupid. I think it's the saying in the US. It's the same here. And the Hindutva is something that is of great concern here in the country and of course international, but it's only one point that they're stressing to gain votes. The Congress has a more inclusive approach, meaning the founding fathers of modern India were Congress members, and Nehru in particular, he had a more inclusive idea that everyone who's living in India should be Indian and should be a Democrat and should be politically involved and should have rights that are protected and that give the people power to participate in this political process, which is now being turned against Congress because the BJP is now campaigning very strongly to the point that they are saying the Congress is pro-Muslim, which is not correct. It's far more difficult to explain than that. But those are the opposite extremes, I would say, or the campaigning that they do. And the weakness of the Congress, if I may add, is that they don't have a good story to tell. The BJP is telling the story of a strong India that is being taken serious by the world. Biden is visiting. the whole
Mhm.
world was visiting for the G20. That's a sign of strength, and people appreciate that. And the Congress has formed an alliance called the India Alliance, where they try to gather the other parties, but their story is pretty much don't vote for BJP, and
Mhm.
they don't have any more than that in up their sleeve. To my
Yeah.
opinion.
So related to the Congress Party, one of our viewers asks whether Sonia Gandhi's daughter will campaign for the Congress Party more visibly. You're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought she's supposed to take on a bigger role, but so far she's not doing that. I think she stepped back. I think she will try to give Rahul Gandhi the limelight, who
Hmm.
is the leader of the Congress Party, but he's the most prominent figure there. And supposedly she doesn't like the way that the campaigning is done, and it is hard to take when you
Hmm.
witness it here on the ground, because it's very
Yeah.
there's a lot of mockery and a lot of hate
Yeah.
going on, and she may be taken up a stronger lead after this election, but so far she's not very visible.
So you talked about how strong the BJP is at the moment, particularly around the prime minister, and sort of how weak the main opposition party, certainly on a national level, than the Congress Party is. Um, has and that's certainly been demonstrated by the last two national elections, where the Congress Party did not do very well. Has the political landscape in India changed at all since the last election in 2019?
Not that much, to my observation. What's happening now is that actually the first polls were giving a landslide win to the BJP right away.
Yeah.
What happens now is that after the first three phases of the election are done, there's weak participation, at least weaker than it was in the last elections. And there are several reasons for that. One would be the heat. I'm in Kolkata right now. I think I mentioned it before. Now the heat has gone down a little bit, but other than that, it's like 40 degrees to 45 degrees Celsius at the moment. So people don't like to go to vote
Mhm.
and stand in line to vote. But the other reason might be that people are, especially the main BJP voters, saying Modi is going to win anyway.
Mhm.
And so they're not as enthusiastic to go
Yeah.
to vote. While the last minute campaigning from the other parties is quite strong, and especially, and there's another thing that is of concern for the BJP, that the BJP has quite a grip on the media here, and that might be one of the differences from the last elections. There's hardly to find any harsh criticism of the
Mhm.
in the great newspapers or news channels, and there's a lot of intrusion, I would say, by
Yeah.
the BJP and by the Adani group, who's strongly connected to the BJP, a very rich person in Gautam Adani. So, but on YouTube, for example, this is now becoming very important. Most of the young voters get their information from YouTube now. There are a lot of
Mhm.
strong YouTubers that are making political programs, and they are strongly opposed to the BJP, and they think it's there has to be a change. And I don't think, sorry,
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't think that's enough to change the outcome in terms of that the BJP won't win. But as Modi has such a strong approach, and he gave out the goal of 400 seats in the Lok
Mhm.
Sabha as a goal, everything below that will be kind of considered to be kind of a failure.
Mhm. So I'd like to pick up on this topic of sort of the media itself, but also social media outlets, because you mentioned that the BJP has a grip on the traditional media. It has also been accused of rolling back civil liberties, and that has included cracking down on free press and freedom of speech. There's also been apparently a rise in disinformation across some social media outlets. You were talking about sort of a positive side of social media, that some younger people are using that to get their information. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about the role that online platforms play in the election, and whether you think that disinformation through social media is pervasive, as we've seen elsewhere, or whether that's something that exists but is moderate.
Yeah, it's neither this or that totally. The thing is that the amount of spread misinformation is huge. Like this week I've had a story, but the AI in English, artificial intelligence manipulated clips are circling. It's not that much intelligence in it. Sometimes it's just they cut up clips in a wrong way, and so something that some politicians say gets spun around, and then it's spread. But then again, the ruling, the BJP itself produces little like cartoonish clips where they say the Congress will give your wealth to the Muslims, and Modi is the only one who can, and it's like a comic figure, like a superhero. He's portrayed, and he's the only one who can stop this. This is, of course, for the more literate voter. So, and this has been spread, and the BJP installed, like the government, which is run by the BJP, installed a very strong cyber crime or cyber laws. So, and they're trying to use those laws to ban whatever they don't like and to be relatively moderate on stuff that is benefiting them.
Mm-hmm.
So Modi for itself, I think yesterday, one person posted a clip where Modi is going on a stage and he's doing a funny little dance, and he wrote to it, I guess this is something that the dictator, meaning Modi, won't ban. And Modi took it and re-exed it. Do we say retweeted it? Because of course he likes it, because it's a funny meme. He's not so. It's really hard to tell. And the YouTube development is something good, but it also comes from something bad, because a lot of journalists who say we can't work in our medias anymore because we are being censored, or we get too much pressure, they put up their own channels on YouTube. So colleagues from the Hindu, so traditional medias.
So I'd like to come to Modi in just a minute, but a couple of our viewers have posed questions about the National Congress party that go in sort of different directions. One viewer is curious whether you've noticed the India Today group, including their talk show Ajtak, giving Congress more support.
No, I didn't notice. I couldn't tell. I was meeting with an India Today colleague today for quite some time, and and he also says he's in West Bengal, which is a bit of a difference, but he says they can work quite freely. He's not feeling that much pressure. That might have something to do with it. But as I'm not watching TV that much here in India, because it's also crazy to watch, in my opinion. It's always like 3 screens at the same time, and everything's and a banner running around. So I can't tell. Sorry.
Yeah, and then someone else is curious whether Shashi Tharoor is still involved with politics. He's the former UN Undersecretary General and a former Indian Minister of State for External Affairs, but he's also a prominent Congress politician and former diplomat. Is he still involved with the party?
I don't think so. I'm not sure about it, but I can tell you for sure, but I don't think so.
Yeah. So let's come back to Modi for a few minutes. because he seems to have this incredibly strong grip and just an incredible hold over the public. There was a um, uh, public opinion poll conducted in 2023 where about 8 in 10 Indian adults had a favorable view of Modi, and that included 55% who had a very favorable view. It would be really interesting for us to hear your opinion about why Modi is so popular and why he has such a strong level of support.
I mean, some reasons I gave you already. The one thing is that India has been, like, from the Indian perspective and also internationally, been more respected. That's a general sentiment that Indians have, and I think they have it for good reasons. It is like that. The G20 was a big thing here in the country, at least for the more educated people, and the others, like when you go here to the countryside or something, people that have like 3 cows and a small field and stuff, but they are Hindus and they now feel that they are something special and that they are superior. I mean, coming from Germany, I'm always a bit sensitive with those feelings being tempered with, but so that's the general thing that he does. So, and the economic growth is visible. He invested in not only in economic projects, but in visibility. I was mentioning the airports before, and undergrounds and faster trains. So transport is a huge problem here in India. You have traffic jams everywhere. It takes you forever to get from one city to another if you can't fly. So that is really important, and it's visible, and you can feel it. It betters your life when you're living in India. You have constant electricity in most of the states now. That might sound ridiculous for Americans, but that is, like in Varanasi, I was there. That is his constituency, where he has to defend his seat in the Lok Sabha. When I was there 2 years ago, the power was gone 1 hour straight during the day, just overuse of it, and now it's running smoothly, and so people feel that the country is developing. It's getting it's going somewhere, and also what he does, and that might be considered manipulative. Sorry, difficult in English.
It's okay, manipulative.
Manipulative. Okay, I don't try it again. But what he's doing is he's connecting himself with good news all the time. Like during COVID times, I was here when in the high times of COVID, and it was horrible. People were dying in hospitals, in front of hospitals. There was not enough oxygen here. The government had not a good approach to COVID. I mean, which government had, but they were closing. The lockdown came too late. Then it was too strict. It got spread by that. You didn't see anything of Modi. He didn't give a statement on it. When the vaccine came out, all of a sudden, billboards all over the country with Modi on vaccine. Get the vaccine, Modi to it. When like there were Indian students in the Ukraine, they got stuck when the war when Russia attacked the Ukraine. So he negotiated, Mr. Jaishankar, the foreign minister, negotiated that they can be flown out. And usually that's something that the foreign minister does. But in this case, Modi did the job and presented them. So whenever there's good news to tell, Modi is doing it. He's connecting himself constantly with positive news, with positive stance, and is that we are moving forward. And with me, it's going uphill all the time. And yeah, people. It's too easy to say people buy that, because that would mean that they're stupid. And of course, not all of them are. Not all of them are illiterate, but it works.
You've touched a couple times on sort of the Hindu nationalism component of Modi's politics, and this is something that many observers have said is very dangerous, because it sort of fuels religious and regional divides and divisions, particularly with the Muslim community. and that it could lead to real conflict, and that there have been some signs of that already. Can you talk about how you see this playing out? Is Modi really just doing this for political reasons to try to get more votes, or is there some underlying agenda that he has in being so outspoken?
I think it's not a deeper agenda. I think it's the general sentiment is my colleague today from India today. I don't quote him by name, but he was, for example, he was giving his example that he comes from a very modern family. So, and you know that that arranged marriage is still very common here. Actually, every marriage, it's usually an arranged marriage. If it isn't, they say it's a love marriage. So, and he was telling me his mother is very liberal and very modern, and she said, "You can marry whomever you want, find your luck, but please don't let it be a Muslim, because it's complicated. It's complicated with the rituals, with the religion, with the families." And he said it's still something with at least with the older generation that is there. And you can address certain fears with Pakistan, which is a Muslim country, but it is actually also the Muslim part of the old British India. So there's a strong, or not a strong, but a slight sentiment that is against Muslims anyway. And he's heeding that. He's referring to that constantly. Usually he's not doing it himself. Usually Shah does it, the Minister for Internal Affairs, or Mr. Jaishankar. I mentioned him, the foreign minister. Like in Pakistan, he told me once when I met him, "You Germans, you build cars, you manufacture cars, you're experts in that. That's what they do in Pakistan with terrorists." Not sure if if that's a proper statement, but the foreign minister sees it that way. So I think fear mongering is the correct English term, that they do it with Pakistan and they do it with the Muslims in the country. Actually, it's not to say it's a minority, understates that it's still 220 million people here are Muslims. It's, if you count only by Muslim population, India is the third largest Muslim country in the world as well. It's the largest Hindu nation, but still a lot of them of Muslims are here. But I think what Modi does is gather the Hindus behind the idea of the superiority, and he does that by fear mongering. And I think it's for the votes. I think it's for to get re-elected constantly and to get them behind him. But that doesn't mean that it's not dangerous, because Muslims, for a good reason, have kind of a feeling that they're being pushed around in some countries in the world right now. So there's a certain level of regression is you can feel that.
So related to this, one of our viewers is curious how Modi is handling both internal but also international pressure to improve India's human rights record.
That is a good question. I was talking to Mahua Moitra. She runs for the Trinamool Congress Party, so opposition. Very remarkable lady. Got thrown out of parliament last year on bogus accusations, and she's running here, and she's very opposed to Modi. And she says, "Why are the US and Germany sucking up to Modi now? Because you need someone to go against China. And that's why you are not criticizing me anymore. And that's why your government is weak in referring especially to Germans or European governments. In my case, and she lived in Frankfurt, so she knows her German politics as well. And she is not totally wrong about it. I mean, Olaf Scholz was visiting India, and of course it was a strong economic agenda again, but the criticism that should be in order is kind of not coming from anywhere, because actually you need someone. India has an open border with China. It's the so-called LAC, the line of actual control. It's in the Himalayas. Nobody cares about the that area of the Himalaya,
Yeah.
but there's an un there's a border that's not a border, and China
Yeah.
and India, they are having like I think 100,000 soldiers each now there, and also India is the biggest market now for
Yeah.
smartphones, for electric cars, for all of that. So yeah, so there's a really little criticism coming internationally. Nationally, as I told you before, not in the traditional media,
Hmm.
not in the not so much in the TV stations, like NDTV, for example, which was one media outlet that was criticizing Modi and the BJP for their agenda quite a bit, was bought by Adani, by one
Hmm.
of the richest Indians, who's also counselor to Modi. So a little criticism, more so on the YouTube channels that I refer
Yeah.
to, but not on a huge scale.
Yeah. So David, you were talking a little bit about how Modi has been able to score points because of economic growth in India and sort of the strong economy. In one of the surveys that I saw before the election, which was conducted by a research institute based in Delhi, it indicated that more than half of the respondents were concerned about issues like unemployment and inflation. Um, I'd be interested to hear how much sort of personal economics plays a role in this election. It's great that the country seems strong and that airports are being built and that India is well regarded. But how does that affect the man, the woman on the street in terms of their concerns about daily life, right? These are issues that are driving voters in Europe, in the United States. Are these also factors in this election in India?
Very good that you asked this question, because then I missed to point out that this is the main issue. It's not the airports. That's a general feel that they have, but employment is number one in all the surveys.
Yeah.
It's a huge country. It's 1.44 billion people now, and it's still growing, and it will keep on growing for the next years. And there's a plateau to be reached, but um, employment, economy, cost of living, inflation, those are the topics. It's also the bigger topics than the Hindutva or something. That
Hmm.
is sentiment to address to, but um, uh, employment is a big thing, and that's also a black box, because uh, people in the countryside feel kind of left behind.
Hmm.
The growth I was referring to before, like being the fifth strongest economy, I think the number is like 40% of the wealth, of the grown wealth, is gained by 1% of Indians.
Hmm.
I mean, that is a problem all over the world. It's not different in the US, but a bit different maybe, or at least in Germany it is. But so there's a general feeling that of people being left behind, and general concern that the country is growing and population, still growing population, but not in there's no work for all those
Hmm.
people. And even
Hmm.
there are some observers that say the economic growth that is there, uh, if you you can put it harshly and say, with when if the population is still growing and you have some economic growth, then
Hmm.
the numbers will be positive no matter what. So
Hmm.
like 5% growth, that which is the current number roundabout, you have that with the population anyway. Yeah. So, but
So,
yeah, employment is the big thing.
so related to this, you had said earlier that the sentiment of many people is that Modi's going to win anyway. And we're almost halfway through this 6-week long election. Um, Several of the reports that I've seen is that voter turnout, voter participation has been lower than expected, and that this has caused some real concern for the BJP, for Modi. They've been super active in terms of trying to get voters to turn out. Can you share with us any insights on why voter turnout is lower than anticipated? Is it just because people assume that the BJP and Modi will win, and so their vote doesn't matter? Or is it sort of this sense of, to use a German word, Politikverdrossenheit, or frustration related to the issues, the economic issues that you were just talking about?
Yeah, the so-called Politikverdrossenheit, the being fed up with the politicians in general, that's also there. That is a problem here. Many politicians in India are corrupt. Some of them are gangsters that get elected or try to get elected to get out of jail free card. Not in huge numbers, but and every party has this problem. Also, there's one thing that as the population is still growing, more and more young voters are now allowed to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the average age in India is around about 27. I don't know how it is in the US, but in Germany it's about 42 or something. And I think the average age in the Lok Sabha and the parliament here is around 60,
Mm-hmm.
close to 60. I don't have the precise numbers, but it's quite old. And so the young voters have a feeling, no matter what I do, they're sitting in Delhi. I mean, Delhi in itself is 35 million people, but still, why go vote? It's hot. Nothing will change. Those are the old guys sitting there and playing their power games. That has nothing to do with my everyday life, with my well-being. So there's some kind of frustration also going on. And the main thing why the election or the campaigning is getting so fierce, and also the attacks against the Muslim minority and against the Congress being or giving the wealth to the Muslims, is because the BJP seems to be very concerned that their outcome won't be as positive because of that kind of, okay, they're going to win and they're old guys. Not many women to vote. That's another weak point for the BJP. So yeah, not much enthusiasm when you are like below 30. Why go vote?
Do you, I mean, obviously the voter turnout is lower than it's been in the past, but do you think that there are any trends here in terms of this kind of behavior this time around versus in previous elections? Or is this a little newer with lower turnout and more fierce campaigning than there's been in the past?
It is new, but it's only the concern is that it's getting lower because they were able to the numbers were rising from for the last election. So now now they're lower. And that's why it's of concern. It's not like it's 3 or 4%, I think, for the last phase. Can tell you by heart, but it's not like 10% or 20%. But it's the general trend is going down, and the population again did grow in between in those 5 years, so it should go up, but it doesn't.
In terms of voting, one of our viewers just submitted a question asking whether the very large diaspora of Indians living abroad is allowed to vote in these elections.
They have postal votes, so they can vote. I don't know how the numbers are, if they're doing it in large numbers, but they can. Usually. Yeah, but you have to apply for that. I think it's a bit complicated.
Yeah, it's probably, I mean, in many places, I sometimes feel intentionally made complicated, but it is a little bit more complicated. But as we've talked about, right, India is such a big country, not just in terms of its population, but also in terms of the geographic size of the country. Are there any sort of significant regional or local issues that are impacting or influencing the dynamics of the election? And I'm asking that question partly because I had heard the expression that if one wins Uttar Pradesh, which is India's most populous state and is it's where Modi's support is extremely strong. It's a state of about 240, 250 million people, that if one wins Uttar Pradesh, one wins India, right? It's sort of a bellwether to a certain degree. Is this state so important? I saw you shaking your head a little bit. Or are there other regions we should be looking at or watching, or other local issues that could influence the election in some way?
Yeah, I mean, Uttar Pradesh, of course, because it's the most populous, and you get like, I think, 80 seats out of Uttar Pradesh alone. So it is very important, and it is BJP mainland. So they will vote there. It's a rural state, many farmers there, not so well developed so far. They have a chief minister, Yogi, who is a strong Hindu, also Hindu nationalist. Bihar is an important state. Maharashtra is important. And for example, like Mumbai being like the more modern city and the whole state around it, it's not. It's also a big state. West Bengal, where I'm now, where I'm now, it's I think worth 34 seats. They are very much opposed to Modi and the BJP because Bengals don't feel they can be Hindus, but many of them are Muslims. Also, they feel connected to Bangladesh, which is also, there are some Bengalis there, and Bangladesh is a Muslim country. So, sorry, Bengal not likely that the BJP will win here. So, and also what is interesting, or for me, it's interesting, the South in India is economically stronger than the North. And the BJP has struggled there because it's mainly Hindu, but it's also mainly Dalit. So the so-called, or one doesn't call them untouchables anymore, but it's like how the perception here is. And they don't benefit from the Hindutva in a way. It's not they feel not, they are not treated as superiors just because they work for the BJP. And because of the economic strength there, they don't have the feeling they have to vote for the BJP because Modi is bringing them wealth and airports and everything because they have that, and they're paying for and they are, by the way, have the impression that they are paying for the airports in the north. So they are paying for the BJP agenda. You know, like that's I don't know. That's like in Italy, but the other way around, where the north is
subsidizing
the south and everything. So. So it's not clear. Uttar Pradesh is important. It has the most seats. BJP will win there, surely, most of the seats. But the other states, for me, are more important, are more interesting right now.
They're probably more interesting because there's more of a debate. There's more of a tug of war in some of those other states. Before we finish, I'd like to come back and talk a little bit about sort of the prospects and potential outcomes of the election. But before we do that, particularly as a German journalist covering the election, I'd be very interested in hearing your sense of how the election is being perceived or being followed by the international community. Do you find that there's a lot of interest in your stories in the Süddeutsche about what's going on in India right now?
Hard to say. My newspaper, gladly, and I say that not to advertise, but the story I find important is being filed. They're listening to me, so as a correspondent, I can't complain. In general, I think people in the West, people in Europe, people in the US should pay a bit more attention to what is happening in South Asia, Southeast Asia, not only with India, but of course, with China, with the Philippines, with all this. And Germans are very concerned still with the Ukraine war, not overly concerned, but in terms of, like in technical terms of working as a journalist, I see that a lot of coverage is being done on that, even if
that's the dominant issue.
It's the dominant issue. And of course, Israel, Gaza war, the other dominant issue. even from a journalistic point of view, sometimes I can say, okay, really nothing happened there. It's bad. It was bad yesterday and will be bad tomorrow. So let's pay some attention to what is happening here. And again, I'm writing a big story for next week, like a page 3. That's the biggest story in the newspaper, so I can't really complain. But I think there's in general, as the world is being perceived as more and more complicated. I don't think that it necessarily is, but all the information that you're getting and all the conflicts that you're having are getting more and more complicated. So people tend to keep to their own complications. My colleague from the science department once gave me as a general rule, he says, people can concern themselves with more than 3 problems at a time. It's a lot of more than 3 problems right now to be concerned with. And so I understand why India is not in focus all the time, but I think because it's so important for the future, the whole part of the world. I mean, it's more than 40% of the world's population is living here. More than 10% of world's population is voting here right now. So it's always good to look abroad, and it's done too little.
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that that's part of the reason why we at the American Council on Germany are having these conversations, because it's important to look at the rest of the world, particularly important countries like India. So that's a great way to sort of segue into the last few minutes that we have together, to think about what lies ahead. As you've said, as polls have indicated, it seems highly likely that Modi and the BJP will win the election. Whether it will be as big a landslide as they would like it to be or not remains to be seen. But what do you think the potential outcomes of the election are, and what impact do you think those outcomes might have?
I think there are 2 strong scenarios, both meaning the BJP will win. One scenario is that it will win like the self-prediction that Modi made, or the goals that he set. I think that won't be a very good outcome in terms of freedom of speech, in terms of what we just said. I think he will tone down after the elections with the anti-Muslim agenda, but still it is there. And it's also a signal for every minority in the country. If the majority is voting for the ruling party and not caring at all that there are other people in the country as well. And that was not the idea of India. And that is not like in everyday India. In Kolkata, it's a wonderful country, and it's Calcutta especially is a super vibrant, fantastic city with Muslims and Hindus and Christians and whatnot. Mother Teresa was here. And so and that was the idea of India, like Nehru designed it and Gandhi designed it. So, and if the BJP will have such a strong hold that they can go through with the Citizen Amendment Act that is also very anti-Muslimic in its outcome, predicted outcome and everything, that would be, I think, not a good thing. If they win and they don't win by a landslide, then it will be interesting how Modi is behaving, how maybe people in the party who want to come to power will say, now he's too old, now he's not the guru who can guarantee the votes anymore. Economically, that the BJP in power is not the worst thing that happened to the country. I'm quite sure of it. But maybe from a Democrat's point of view, a win, but not a very high win, would be more interesting in terms of discussion and democratic processes being protected and everything. And I don't think that I still think, although there are some saying maybe there's a turnover or something, but I don't believe it.
Right. Not a big change. And so what do you think? I mean, you said that you think that Modi might tone down some of his election rhetoric as he goes into his 3rd term, but But what do you think the big challenges are that lie ahead for his next term in office, or for whatever the new government might be that comes into office?
Besides of promising his party 400 seats, he promised economical growth from like fantasy numbers, being the third biggest economy by 2030. He's building like coal plants. Seven of them are being built at the time, not he, but the BGP. So it's the economics. It's on the other hand, they are scaling down military. Military is one of the few very stable employments you could have here. A lot of unresolved issues. There were huge farmers' protests during the last election period. Those problems are not solved. Farmers are very poor, and it's around 40% of the population is living from farming, more or less. So a lot of economical problems that are not being solved and that need solving if you really want to push the country forward.
Mm-hmm. So I guess as we wrap up here, and as you think about the remaining weeks of the election, what are the things that you would encourage our viewers to watch, to sort of which developments should we be keeping an eye on, if we want to try to understand what's going on, sort of behind the scenes and on the ground in India?
That is really hard to tell because it's I would try to maybe look for the YouTube channels. Most of them are in Hindi, but some of them are translated. I think that's quite interesting. And other than that, it's hard. I think it's interesting what happens in the region. I think it's interesting what happens here in West Bengal. I think Bihar, like the states, because of course, when you take time out of your day to concern yourself with India, you consider it to be one country.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a very, very big country that consists of many countries. And I think Maharashtra, Bihar, West Bengal are the countries within the country to look at. I mentioned her before, Mahua Moitra. I'm meeting her for a reason, a strong opposition. Follow Rahul Gandhi on X. That is interesting. Of course, he has an agenda, but it's more moderate. And yeah, follow what's happening in the States. Not only what is being said in Delhi. Also, if one wants to Google it, Kejriwal, that is another interesting topic. The chief minister of Delhi, opposition, he's being in jail right now. That is at least obstruction of election process. On corruption charges, the Kejriwal case is quite interesting because they are actually like he's not able to campaign right now, and he's a strong politician that's against the BGP.
And that's, I mean, that's certainly where these authoritarian tones come through. You know, even though this is a democracy.
It is a democracy, and what I learned over the last days, and I keep hearing that the vote is free and fair, but the election process and the campaigning is not anymore. And I think that's an important distinction, because if you use your power to prevent other candidates from campaigning, and like the Congress Party, their accounts have been frozen on they haven't paid some taxes or whatnot, but they can't campaign. You need huge amounts of money, like in the US. Like for the constituency, I was yesterday, 1.2 million voters. They have over 29,000 people running around telling people how to vote, like with fake ballots, where to put their fingerprint and everything. You need so much manpower. Also, that closes the circle for the long election process. You need a lot of money, and you need a lot of stamina for that. And the BGP is obviously using the power to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. Well, David, Herzlichen Dank. This was phenomenal, really insightful and very informative. So I just want to thank you again for taking the time to share with us your insights on what's going on in India and giving us some recommendations for things to look at as the election continues to unfold. Herzlichen Dank.
Yeah, thank you. Herzlichen Dank. Have a good day.